Sir, in India, it's common to hear of the need for fiscal consolidation and the importance to try and bring the fiscal deficit down to the long-delayed 3% target. Rating agencies, economists, and indeed economic journalists will all speak of it. It's rare, though, to hear someone speak of the need for slightly looser fiscal policies which could help spur higher growth and perhaps be targeted towards one of India's biggest problems, jobs. Thiruvadanthai is the head of research at Jerome Levy Forecasting Center. He wrote a paper for the Azim Premji University discussing some of those very ideas. He joins us here on Bloomberg Quint. Shri, firstly, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here. Appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. I'm going to start actually not so much with your paper, but I'm curious to know, as you wrote this paper, what you have made of this entire debate around jobs in India. Job statistics have been the hardest to come by in India, and we've seen a bit of tussle, whether it's political or economic. It's tough to tell. I'm curious to know what you've made of it.
Yeah, thank you, Era, for having me. Yeah, the job statistics is a minefield, and part of the problem is that we have the Indian economy is obviously changing. The structure of the economy is changing, and when you have massive structural changes, as we have had over the last 20-30 years, the data often do not keep up with those changes. Plus, we have had the problem with the longest running survey, the NSSO1, was discontinued, and then it was restarted, but it was restarted with some survey changes. So it's not really clear whether it is comparable to the older ones. And then we have had this new survey which is based on EPFO data, which obviously doesn't have long-term comparables. And so you have a bunch of problems, and the point is we are never going to be able to settle this. Maybe with a long time lag we will be able to get some clarity on this picture. But I think the debate should be not about these data, but about the longer term trend, which is very clear that there has been a deceleration in job growth over the last 30 years, except for a brief respite during 1999 to 2004.
Shri, and you allude to some research that you have done, which shows that over a period of time, for every percentage point increase in GDP growth, the jobs created are lesser. Is that, it's sort of intuitive, knowing the way technology has played out in the economy, all economies, including India. Is that where it links to, or is it more than that?
No, that is what I'm linking to. Yes, it is, and I don't know whether it is technology. I mean, people always make the argument it is technology, because you see countries like Japan, which are supposedly in stagnation, and Germany. Of course, they are not comparable to India, but if you compare them to their other developed market brethren, they have done a much better job in converting GDP growth into jobs.
Sure. So, the jobs GDP correlation is not indeed that surprising. We've heard enough people say that, we have to grow faster. Certain parts of the economy, like manufacturing, have to grow faster if we need jobs and the right kind of jobs. I think where you go against conventional wisdom is what should generate that growth for starters. And you're saying that in India, we need slightly looser fiscal policies. We're too tight?
Yes, there are two separate issues, and what I have tried to do in this paper is to marry both of them together. One is that fiscal policy has been too tight throughout most of this cycle. In fact, I've been writing about this since 2015. And the backdrop is that you have had slowing corporate sector investment, because corporate sector, they have been dealing with very high debt load, and you have a banking sector that is clogged up because of NPAs. So the private sector engine is basically stalled. So in that kind of a situation, you need the government to pick up the slack. If you do not do that, what you have is an economy that's going to be sluggish, and part of the reason why we have low inflation is that. The other side of it is, how do we create jobs while we are, and at the same time do fiscal policy. So the idea here is, if you look around in India, a lot of employers complain that there are not enough skills. And at the same time, most employers are not willing to invest in job training and in skill development. So how do you take these two things and use fiscal policy to bridge that gap between lack of skills and the need for skilled labor. So, you can have apprenticeship programs in which the government subsidizes a significant part of it. It's no good having a separate classroom skill development program. What you need is on-the-job training. Those are the things that work best, and it has been shown to work best all around the world. So those are some of the things that we can do while also using fiscal policy towards a goal.
I'll come to the second part in a minute. I do want to, ask you a little bit more about the first side of things. In the last few years, the government has sort of stepped in where the private sector has been missing. For instance, in infrastructure, there has been a far more sort of concentrated effort from the government. While the fiscal deficit of the center has been in check, there has been, borrowings on the balance sheets of public sector companies, etc., to try and compensate for some of the limited headroom that the central government may have. Do you still continue to argue that you need a greater sort of input of the government finances into growth, despite what we have seen so far?
Yes, I think so. I mean, you look at the inflation picture, and that tells you where we are. And the overall growth picture, again, the data are messy, but it's not going anywhere, and we can complain that it is because our exports are not growing. But the point is our exports are growing along with the rest of the world. It's not like we are doing exceptionally poorly on exports. The fact is the global economy is weak, the global backdrop is weak, and we have the corporate investment cycle is still sluggish because of corporate profitability, and margins are still low. And so, yes, the government has done something for sure, and if you take the overall consolidated fiscal deficit picture, it is obviously expanded more than just the central government, and you are absolutely right on that. But still, if you look at the overall picture, the right parallel is from 98 to 2004. Then too, the corporate sector was dealing with some deleveraging with debt issues, and what the central government did was run larger deficits. So overall government deficits went up, and the debt actually climbed. It went up to, and I think in 2003-04 it was at 83% of GDP. Right now I think it's at 66%. So I mean, it's not that we want to grow the debt, but I'm just saying that we don't need to be alarmed. In 2003 and 2004 it was at 83%, nothing bad happened. So I just think we have room to do more.
And you also go against conventional wisdom that at least we all spout quite often, which is that higher fiscal deficit means we'll have a current account deficit problem down the line, we'll have an inflation problem. You're questioning some of those long-held beliefs.
Yes, I mean, surely if your economy is growing really fast, the current account will tend to widen somewhat. But it's not like fiscal deficit equals a current account deficit and a BOP crisis. I mean, that's not necessarily true. And it also depends on the type of fiscal stimulus that you do. If you do it more at the low end, the way we are talking about creating low end, creating jobs, it will also tend to ease some of the supply constraints, number one, which has been one of the problems for India. In terms of whenever we do run the economy hard, we run into supply constraints and inflation picks up. And if you do it through a skill development program, probably it will ease some of the bottlenecks and the inflationary concerns. And that also will actually alleviate some of the BOP pressures, because inflation then makes the currency unattractive and uncompetitive, and then leads to the widening BOP. So these things are all interlinked, and it is not the link between a fiscal deficit and current account widening is not such a tight one as people seem to think.
I have one more question on this, and then I'll come specifically to some of your proposals on jobs. You don't talk at all about how a wider fiscal deficit would be financed, in the sense that, we are struggling to just have the market absorb the kind of borrowings that you are doing, even at a 3.4% fiscal deficit. That's on the domestic side. On the global side, if the current account deficit were to widen, we would have to ensure that we have enough sort of capital flows coming in to finance that deficit. Do either of those give you enough reason to say, okay, yes, maybe a fiscal deficit wider is helpful, but we also have to worry about the financing of it?
Right. Okay. So here is the issue. So there are any government, of course, the Indian government does, the RBI is theoretically independent. But the fact is the Indian government ultimately controls the currency in which it is issuing its bonds. So there is no constraint as such. So if the bond market is not able to absorb it for some reason and the interest rates are going up, then the issue is the RBI monetary policy too tight? And that's the real question. And the second issue is with respect to the current account financing. See, the major issue with current account financing always comes down to what are the global financial conditions. And right now, the global financial conditions are really, really easy. And money is flowing into emerging markets. The other day, I think there was some country which made a 30-year bond issue, and I don't even remember, it was Mongolia or something like that, made a 30-year bond issue, or may have been Uzbekistan. And they were thinking about making a 50-year bond issue. So it's not like the capital is the capital issue is not the issue right now. Okay, surely when there is a problem with capital, we can have problems because we do need to bridge the current account deficit for sure. But the problem is at that time, you're having a low debt is not an insurance. The only insurance is having a large amount of reserves and not having a current account deficit. Yes, that's obviously the only other insurance. But even that is not necessarily insurance. You can see countries like Malaysia and Thailand, which have current account surpluses, still get into currency problems. So there is not really much you can do about it. You just have to deal with those kind of situations and build some buffers against it. But having a low government debt to GDP ratio is not the buffer. It is totally useless.
Okay, Shri, let me come to the specific parts of your paper which talk about the link into jobs. So two questions. So one way to think of it is that you run a wider fiscal deficit, you have growth that comes in, that growth automatically creates investment and hence jobs. Or are you more in favor of, say, a wider fiscal deficit with a targeted focus of that money being used for job creation initiatives like Narega or an expansion of Narega, which you talk about?
Yes, I think that will be the ideal thing because we are simultaneously releasing the supply bottlenecks in the country even as we are doing stimulus. So India's problem always has been when we run our economy too hard, we do have a demand problem, but we also have a supply constraint. And so what happens is we tend to get inflationary pressures start to pick up, as we saw earlier in the decade. So how do you contain that? And part of the reason why we have these supply constraints, I mean, we have these inflation pressures, we have all kinds of supply constraints in the economy. To some extent, having a nationally integrated market with GST and better infrastructure, we have actually alleviated some of those things. But if you actually create skills and create jobs, then you're also going to release some of those supply constraints as you're growing your economy and your stimulus.
We haven't done very well in these sort of skill development programs. We have a large skill development program, we have a Startup India program, we have a Make in India program. All of those at some level were intended towards job creation. We haven't gotten very far, sorry.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and that is, in fact, India has always had great programs. I mean, this is always going through even back to the 1950s and 60s, in terms of small scale industry development program. The question is not having the program. First of all, of course, some of these programs are not well designed, but also the funding. Without funding, none of these programs are really going to work. And the key issue with jobs is not having one classroom replace another. Okay, I'm going to have a skill development program with a classroom skill development. That's not really going to help. What you really need is on-the-job training. And it has been shown by a lot of studies that on-the-job training is what works best. And for that, but the problem is the companies don't want to invest in that kind of a thing because they don't want to take up that overhead. And that's been the trend globally. All training programs have generally been cut globally. So what you need to do is subsidize those on-the-job training programs. That way the companies don't have that kind of overhead. At the same time, they are taking a little bit of effort to do that because they're going to get a pool of skilled workers to hire from. That's what you need. So we need to think about some kind of apprenticeship programs, internship programs. Those are the things that have been shown to work around the world. And if we do those things, we can't overnight solve these problems, and we have to keep working at it. But one is having better programs, but more importantly, we can't be stingy about funding them.
Do tax incentives for job creation help? I ask because I think the Congress party has put that as one of the items in its manifesto. Is there evidence that that works?
I don't know what specifically that program is. Most of the programs that I have seen are generally about wage subsidies, effectively. That's what places like Germany and Switzerland do, essentially. So you can't work that into a tax incentive kind of a situation. I'm sure it can be done. One needs to look into the exact design of the program and what are the lacunas or what are the strengths of such a design. I haven't looked into their specific proposal, but yes, it can work.
Sure. You know, the conversation right now, although the parties, both the BJP and the Congress, are saying that they don't intend to move away from the prescribed fiscal path, but the conversation is that if there were to be fiscal room created, that money would be channeled into either some sort of, transfers to farmers in the case of the BJP, or in the Congress's case, a minimum income guarantee kind of scheme. What's the toss-up between going down that route vis-a-vis going down something like, using fiscal space for expanding Narega or otherwise?
So here is what I think, right? If you do go through the basic income guarantee or minimum income, whatever those proposals are, I mean, these are catching fire all around the world. Here is the issue with anything. In the long term, in India, people use this term very pejoratively, and I think it is very insulting. They say muft khor. And it's used similarly in the US and other contexts as well. When people are on dole and they're getting money from the government for doing nothing, generally speaking, it creates resentment. The famous economist here, Hyminsky, used to say, entitlements create resentment. But jobs create self-respect, and also you're creating productive citizens who have a vested interest in the country. So plus, more important, if you do the basic income guarantee, what you're doing is you're creating demand without necessarily alleviating supply constraints. Whereas by creating jobs, you are alleviating the supply constraints as well. So that's why I think it's better to focus the energies on creating jobs, on the fiscal energies on job programs, rather than on income guarantee, which is not to say we shouldn't have some kind of minimum social safety nets, which we do have, and we have actually done a remarkable job in bringing down poverty. So the question in India is not of poverty. If you look at the recent Brookings study, they said that in another 5 years or 7 years, by 2025, India will not have any extreme poverty at all. So we have done a very good job with growth, and we have done an excellent job with bringing down poverty, extreme poverty at least. So the question is not of that. The question is of creating jobs and having people, self-actualization for people, having some meaning in life.
All right, Shri, I'll end this conversation with an out-of-syllabus question, taking off from what you were talking about, the broader structure of the Indian economy. You're watching elections as closely as we are here. My question to you is that whoever comes to power, clearly jobs is one thing that you'd like them to prioritize. Do you think jobs, some structural changes in agriculture are some of the things that we need to do? Move away from the tried and tested thinking of, let's push manufacturing, that's the way to get jobs. We need new ideas. More than anything else, it looks like.
Yes, we do need, and one of the things about agriculture is that's where we can combine all the various programs that we have, various subsidies that we have, into a minimum income guarantee in agriculture, so that we don't have the distortions caused by these various programs, which tend to lead to certain crop patterns and things like that. So you just give them minimum, and the farmers let them figure out what they want to do and how they want to do it. I think that is a much better mechanism, and that's where the limited income guarantee kind of a thing can be worked into the farm economy, for sure. I do think we don't need to think about, when we think about manufacturing, most of the time we are thinking about manufacturing for exports and manufacturing for the rest of the world. What we really need to think about is manufacturing for India, for the bottom of the pyramid. How can we do that? And how can we create what is called rural industries, basically, so the industries that are not completely in the urban areas, but they are catering to rural demand, but they are manufacturing nonetheless.
All right. Hopefully some of these new ideas will come into play with a new government. Shri, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us on Bloomberg Quint.
Thank you, Ira.
All right. Thanks so much for watching Bloomberg Quint. You can read more about Shri's paper on BloombergQuint.com as well, plus listen into this conversation on that site too.